What I do is I write, I direct, to some extent script. I move cameras in 3D. I design all the time. So my toolbox ranges from everything that Adobe do, through to code in Notepad and things like that. It's a sort of broad palette that you work with, and I come from a background that's allowed me to sort of work up, but always at the coal face, I suppose. I started as a commercial artist, sort of paying my way through film school. I was doing film studies at the same time, so I had those two things. I sort of blundered into interactive content and just sort of stayed there, realizing that rather than go into film, I could sort of do a lot of film technique and storytelling in new media instead. And in a way it was more interesting because new media was emerging, still is, as a storytelling format. Innovation sometimes needs to be starved a little bit. So a lack of oxygen kind of makes you do things and find things out. What's exciting is an ongoing convergence that's been happening for years. And as the years go by, the technology becomes cheaper, more efficient, smaller, faster, all of those sort of things. The convergence and the model of convergence changes and becomes more interesting. So there are so many fronts that are exciting, but to list a few, storytelling is a big deal, I think. The way that you can interact with your audience in the storytelling space is a very, very interesting area. We've tried a lot of experiments, or not a lot, but we've experimented with that over the last few years in considerable ways with AFI winning projects like Gallipoli through to Australian Writer Guild awarded projects like Bluebird. Not necessarily finding the right model in terms of drama narrative online, but certainly stabbing at it in a really interesting way and finding out things. Obviously, a lot of innovation is a kind of about making mistakes as well and recognizing the lessons from those mistakes. Another crossover for me at the moment is in the traditional sort of arena of games, and that transferring to the web and to non-linear narratives. You have the sandboxes of the sort of AA and AAA game universe, which are sort of well known, and then you have the language of the web, and those two things are transgressing at the moment. I think that's really interesting. I mean, the innovation group, to sort of single one area of the ABC is, but I would say that innovation happens everywhere. It happens in sort of bright minds in all sorts of units, and whenever it happens, it's either fostered or not, and that's more than anything else, that's the challenge, to find out the really good ideas and make sure they have enough space to breathe and grow. I'm very fortunate because I have a remit to look at what's coming and try different things in that context. And that's why we have a string of products that kind of do that, like iView, Gallipoli, Bluebird, the Explainer project. These are all examples of trying things in slightly different and new ways, trying to predict the trends that are coming and adopt them. We work with performers and artists all the time, often recording their work or collaborating with them. A good idea within the context of the ABC, but more generally, a really good idea to introduce an artist into a new media context, because it's very two-way. There are sort of four things that characterize, sort of in my mind, that characterize good innovation and good digital creativity. One is eclecticism. You should have a very broad view, culturally, informationally, politically, socially, artfully, all of those things, artistically. And you've got to mix that really with some forms of specialization. Sometimes one is enough for people, but sometimes they have a few. And mix that with a degree of humility, which is incredibly important. And then a mix of sort of intuition as well, so that you can tell when someone's right or wrong. And that's, intuition kind of comes partly from so-called talent and partly from experience. So intuition is something that comes. But those four things are really useful because I'll get to the artists in a sec, but new media is it's essentially more complicated than any of the media put together. As an extraction. So it's more complicated than film production. It's more complicated than audio production. It's more complicated than photography, because it's a meld of all of those things together. Plus, it's a new language that requires different skills to the linear language. So when you bring an artist into that, they are, as my second point was, they are a specialist, and they've been working in a different way. So you spark a whole number of potentials. One is that they will see things completely differently to the people who are working in this new media context. Therefore, they'll not only challenge them, but they'll be able to completely change the point of view of that person, which could have great benefits, because it's easy, like anything else, it's easy to get stuck. Secondly, they are innately talented, so the translation of what they're used to into new media context could be exciting. And then I suppose thirdly, looking at it from the sort of new media people's perspective, they get a fresh look, they get a new idea, but they also get to craft that into the language and context of experience and new media that they understand.